The night was cold, and the wind pressed against the wooden walls of the man's small cabin. He had lived alone for years, far from the noise of the town. He thought he had seen everything that loneliness could give: silence, emptiness, and peace mixed with pain. But that night, something unexpected happened. Something that would change everything. There was a soft knock at the door. At first, he thought it was the wind. But then the knock came again. Light, weak, almost like someone afraid to be heard. He opened the door slowly, and his heart stopped. Standing there was a little girl. No more than 8 or 9 years old. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Her small hands were shaking, and her eyes looked wide with hunger and fear. She did not speak. She only stared at him as if asking without words. The man froze for a moment, wondering how a child could survive out here alone. "Come inside," he finally said, in a low voice. She hesitated, then stepped into the warm cabin. The fire in the fireplace threw a soft glow across her pale face. Her cheeks were hollow, and her lips were dry. She looked like she had not eaten for days. The man quickly took a piece of bread from the table and gave it to her. She grabbed it with trembling hands and began to eat fast, almost too fast, as if she thought it might be taken away from her. He poured some warm water into a cup and handed it to her. She drank it down quickly. He sat across from her, watching, wondering who she was. She looked like a lost bird, fragile, afraid, but with a quiet strength in her eyes. He wanted to ask questions, but he held them back. He knew sometimes silence gave more comfort than words. After she ate, the girl leaned back against the chair. She looked at him and whispered something, but her voice was so soft he could not hear. He leaned closer. She whispered again, "Thank you." Those 2 words hit him harder than a storm. It had been so long since he had heard such honest gratitude. He nodded. "You're safe here," he said, though inside he wondered if that was true. The girl's eyes darted to the window as if afraid someone was out there. The man noticed and asked gently, "Is someone following you?" She shook her head quickly, but he could see the fear. He knew she was hiding something, but he did not push her as the night grew deeper. She sat close to the fire. He gave her an old blanket, and she pulled it tightly around her small body. For a moment, she almost looked at peace. The man thought of his own past, the time when he once had a family, but they were gone now. His life had been nothing but silence since then. But tonight, the silence was broken by this fragile visitor. When he went to check on her later, he found her asleep in the chair. Her head resting against the blanket, she looked even smaller now, as if the world had been too heavy for her to carry. He gently lifted her and placed her on the small bed in the corner. She stirred, but did not wake. Her breathing slowed, and she slept deeply. The man stood there for a long time, watching her. Something in his chest tightened. It was not pity. It was something deeper, a strange pull he could not explain. He did not even know her name, yet he felt the need to protect. Her morning came with pale light through the window. The man expected to find her still sleeping, but when he looked, the bed was empty. The blanket was folded neatly, and the door was slightly open. She was gone. He stepped outside quickly. Scanning the snow-covered ground, he saw small footprints leading away from the cabin, disappearing into the woods. She had left without a word. Without even telling him who she was, the man stood there in the cold air, his breath turning white. His heart felt strangely heavy. He told himself it was better this way. She had her own path, and he had his lonely one. But deep inside, he knew it was not the end, because when he looked at those small footprints fading into the distance, he felt a truth he could not deny. He would see her again, and when that moment came, everything in his quiet life would change. The man had almost convinced himself that the little girl would never come back. Days passed, and though his eyes often wandered to the door, it stayed closed. He told himself she had found her family. or someone else had taken her in. Still, every time the wind touched the cabin walls, he remembered her small knock. It was on the fourth evening, just as the sun was slipping down and the forest turned red with shadows, that he heard footsteps. This time it was not only one set, but two. He froze, his hand resting on the door. His heart beat faster when he opened it. The sight before him nearly stole his breath. The girl was there, standing close to the edge of the doorway, clutching the hand of a woman. The woman looked worn and tired, her clothes thin, her face pale, yet there was strength in the way she stood. Her eyes, large and deep, were filled with both fear and hope. "Do you remember me?" the little girl asked softly. Her voice carried a fragile warmth. The man nodded, unable to speak at first. "Of course," he said finally. His eyes shifted to the woman. "This is my mother," the girl whispered. The woman bowed her head slightly. "Thank you for feeding my daughter," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost breaking, but it carried a weight that made his chest tighten. "Without you, she would not be standing here." The man stepped aside. "Come in," he said. Inside, the fire was burning low. He placed more wood and let the flames rise again. The girl sat down near the warmth quickly, pulling her mother with her. The woman sank into the chair as if she had carried miles of suffering on her shoulders. The man watched them, wondering how they had survived all this time. He poured water into cups and handed them over. The girl drank fast, but the mother sipped slowly. With careful dignity, "You must have been traveling for days," the man said gently. The mother nodded. "We had nowhere safe to stay," she said, her eyes lowered and her voice dropped lower. "We were abandoned." The words struck like stones. The girl lowered her head, hiding her face. The man felt anger stir inside him. Who could leave a woman and her child to wander like this? To starve, to suffer. He wanted to ask more, but the mother's silence told him not to push. Instead, he asked, "Why come back here?" The mother's gaze lifted and met his. For a long moment, she did not answer. Her eyes seemed to search his face as if testing his heart. Finally, she spoke. "Because my daughter said you were kind." The girl nodded quickly. "He helped me, Mama. He gave me food. He didn't ask for anything." The man looked away, embarrassed. His cabin was nothing, his life empty. Yet to them, it had been shelter. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Then, outside, a sound echoed, a shout. Carried through the trees, the woman's head snapped toward the door, and the girl's hand gripped her mother's tightly. The man stood, his eyes narrowing. "Who's out there?" he asked. The mother's lips trembled. She did not answer. Instead, she pulled her daughter closer. The girl's eyes filled with fear. He stepped to the door and looked out. The forest seemed empty. Only the cold wind moved between the trees, but his instincts told him otherwise when he came back in. The girl was still clutching her mother. The mother's face was pale. She tried to hide it. But he saw the truths. Someone was after them. "You're not safe," the man said quietly. The woman nodded, her voice shaking. "We had no choice. We came here because there was nowhere else. If we are not welcome, we will leave at sunrise." Her words pierced him. He had lived alone so long. His heart had grown hard, but now, looking at the fragile child and the exhausted mother, he knew he could not send them away. "You will stay," he said firmly, "at least until I know. You are safe." The girl's eyes lit up with hope, and the mother looked at him with a mixture of relief and sorrow. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped herself. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." That night, the cabin no longer felt empty. The little girl fell asleep near the fire, wrapped in the same blanket he had given her before. The mother sat quietly, watching the flames. The man sat across from her, his mind filled with questions. Who were they running from? What had driven them into the cold woods? What dangers were now standing at his very door? He did not know the answers, but he knew one thing: his quiet life was over. Their presence had changed everything, and deep in his heart, he knew the footsteps in the snow outside were only the beginning of a storm. The morning was gray, heavy clouds hanging over the forest. The man woke early. Though he had not slept much, every sound outside made him alert. Every crack of a branch made him think of the voices he had heard the night before when he stepped into the main room. He found the little girl still curled up near the fire, her tiny hands clutching the blanket. Her mother was sitting nearby, awake, her eyes fixed on the flames. She looked older than she was, worn down by years of hardship. The man poured warm water into a cup and placed it in front of her. She accepted it with a small nod. For a while, neither of them spoke, the silence thick but not empty. Then she finally looked up, and he saw the question in her eyes, the question of whether he deserved to hear the truth. "My name is Lyra," she said quietly, "and my daughter is Neela." The man nodded. "I'm Daniel." Lyra gave a faint smile, but it faded quickly. Her eyes darkened as she began to speak. "We once had a family," she whispered. "My husband, my child, and me. We lived in the town not far from here. We were not rich, but we managed." He worked. "I cared for Neela. It was simple. It was enough." Daniel listened carefully, every word sinking into him. "Then sickness came," she said, her voice breaking. It spread through the town. "My husband was strong, but it took him fast. One day he was laughing with Neela. The next he was gone." Her hands trembled, and Neela stirred in her sleep, turning toward her mother as if she could feel the pain even in dreams. "After that, everything changed," Lyra continued. "His family, my family. Even neighbors we thought they would help. Instead, they turned from us. They said we were a burden, that we should leave, that we should not beg." Daniel's fists tightened. He had seen cruelty before, but never did it feel so bitter as when told like this. "They pushed us out," she said. "We had no money, no roof, no food, for weeks. We walked, searching for scraps. Sometimes people would throw us pieces. Most of the time, they only laughed." Neela grew weaker. Her voice cracked. "I thought I would lose her too." The silence after her words felt heavy. Daniel stared into the fire, imagining their endless walk through cold streets and darker woods. His chest tightened with anger. "Why didn't you go back?" he asked softly. Lyra shook her head. There was nothing to go back to. Once they shut their doors, they would never open them again. And some wanted worse than that. Her eyes flickered toward the window, a shadow crossing her face. There are men who see weakness as something to use. A woman with no protection, a child too small to fight back. We had to keep running. Daniel understood now why she had looked so afraid the night before, why Neela's eyes had filled with terror at the sound outside. They were not only abandoned, they were hunted. "Why here?" Daniel asked, though his voice was gentle. "Because Neela remembered you," Lyra whispered. Her gaze softened for the first time. "She told me of the man in the woods who gave her food, who spoke kindly. She begged me to find you. She believed you were different." Daniel looked at the girl, still sleeping, her face peaceful at last. His heart felt heavy. He had done nothing but offer bread and water, yet to her it had meant safety. "You risked much coming back," he said. "Yes," Lyra admitted. "But when you have nothing left, even a small light looks like hope." Her words stayed with him. He thought of his own loneliness, the years he had spent in silence, shutting out the world. And now here were two lives asking for shelter. He had not asked for this. But he could not deny the pull in his chest. Just then, Neela stirred awake. Her small eyes opened, and when she saw Daniel, she smiled weakly. "You're still here," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Of course I am." The girl reached for her mother's hand, then looked at him with a seriousness far too deep for her age. "Please don't let them take us," she said. The words cut through the room like a blade. Daniel glanced at Lyra, who lowered her head, shamed that her daughter had spoken her fear aloud. "You're safe here," Daniel said firmly, "as long as I breathe, no one will harm you." For a moment, silence wrapped around them. But it was no longer empty, it was filled with something new. Trust, fragile but real. Daniel did not know what storm was waiting beyond the trees. But now he knew the truth of their struggle. And knowing it, he also knew this: he could no longer stand aside, because in that small cabin, survival was no longer about him. It was about them. All three of them, and he would not let them be broken again. The night came heavy and cold. The wind whistled through the trees like whispers of warning. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, casting shadows that danced across the wooden walls. Daniel sat near the window, his eyes on the darkness outside. He had not told Lyra or little Neela, but his heart was restless. He had heard something earlier, far in the distance. A sound that did not belong to the forest. It was not the cry of an animal, nor the wind breaking branches. It was voices, low, rough, moving closer. Daniel's instincts sharpened. Years of living alone had taught him how to read the silence. And tonight, the silence was wrong. Behind him, Neela slept. Her small body curled under the blanket, her breathing soft and steady. Lyra sat close to the fire, her eyes half closed. But Daniel knew she was not resting. He could see the tension in her shoulders. The way her hands gripped the fabric of her dress. She was waiting, just as he was. Suddenly, from outside, a snap echoed through the night, like a branch breaking. Under heavy boots, Daniel's head turned sharply toward the door. Lyra's eyes flew open. "Someone's out there," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel raised a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. He moved silently across the cabin. Every step careful, he picked up the old rifle leaning near the wall. It was not new, not powerful, but it was enough to warn off men if needed. Through the small crack in the window shutters, he saw them. 3 figures moving through the trees. Their shapes blurred by the dark, but their movement clear. They were searching, scanning the ground, their lanterns cutting through the night. Daniel's jaw tightened, his chest grew heavy. He had been right. Someone had followed them here. Lyra moved closer, her face pale. "It's them," she whispered, "the ones who chased us before." Her words made the air colder. Daniel turned to her quickly. "Stay with Neela. Don't make a sound." Neela stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. She rubbed them with small hands and whispered, "Mama." Lyra hushed her, holding her close. The girl sensed the fear and clung tighter to her mother. Daniel turned back to the window. The men were closer now. Their voices carried faintly through the wind, harsh and mocking. "She must have come this way," one said. "Tracks go to the cabin." Another answered. Daniel's stomach twisted. He stepped back, his mind racing. He could fight, but if they forced their way in, Lyra and Neela would be trapped. He had to think. The footsteps grew louder, crunching over the snow. A hard knock slammed against the wooden door. The sound made Neela jump in fright. "Open up." A voice shouted, "We know you're in there." Daniel gripped the rifle tighter. His voice was steady but low. "Stay quiet, no matter what." He told Lyra. She nodded. Pulling Neela into her arms, the men outside banged on the door again. The old wood rattled, "Open before we break it down." One barked. Daniel took a deep breath. He had lived a lonely life for years, but now, with 2 frightened souls behind him, he felt something new afire rising in his chest. He would not let them be taken, not again. He called out through the door, his voice firm. "Go away. You've got no business here." Laughter erupted outside. cruel and sharp. We want what belongs to us. One man sneered, the woman and the girl. Daniel's blood ran cold. His hands tightened on the rifle. His voice turned hard as stone. They don't belong to you. The men jeered. Step aside, old man, unless you want trouble. Daniel positioned himself by the door, his heart pounding. He could hear Neela's muffled whimpers, Lyra's whispers trying to soothe her. Every sound behind him reminded him what was at stake. Another slam shook the door. The wood groaned. A crack formed near the hinges. They were serious. Daniel raised the rifle and fired a shot into the air through the open window. The blast roared in the night, echoing through the trees. For a moment, silence followed. Then came more laughter. You think that scares us? One shouted, You can't shoot us all. Daniel's heart raced. He knew they might not leave easily. He only had a few bullets, and once they were gone, the cabin would be no shield. But then something unexpected happened. The wind shifted. Carrying distant howls of wolves, the forest had its own dangers. The men cursed under their breath. One muttered, We'll come back. Their footsteps faded into the distance. Their lanterns disappeared, swallowed by the dark trees. Daniel stayed by the door, his breath heavy. He did not move until the forest was silent again. Only then did he lower the rifle. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the storm of emotions inside him. When he turned back, Lyra was holding Neela tightly. Tears ran down her face. She looked at him with eyes full of desperation. But also gratitude. You shouldn't have risked yourself. She whispered. Daniel shook his head. I had no choice, he said, his voice firm but quiet. No one is taking you. Not while I'm here. Neela reached out with her small hand. You're brave, she said softly. Her innocent words pierced deeper than any blade. Daniel knelt down, resting the rifle against the wall. I'm not brave, he whispered. I just can't stand by while good people suffer. Lyra's lips trembled. She looked at him with something unspoken in her eyes. Something that scared him more than the men outside it was trust. Deep and fragile that night, no one truly slept. The fire burned until morning. Daniel sat by the door, the rifle across his knees, his eyes never leaving the window, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the danger was not over. The men would come back. He knew it. Lyra knew it. Even little Neela sensed it. But now, the cabin was no longer only his shelter. It was a wall against the darkness, and for the first time in years, Daniel knew his life was no longer his own. He was bound to them, bound to protect them, bound to fight for them. And as the first light of dawn crept through the trees, he whispered to himself, if they return, they will find more than a lonely man in a cabin. They will find someone ready to fight. The dawn after the long night felt heavy. The air outside was cold and sharp. The forest quiet, as if holding its breath. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Daniel sat slumped in the chair near the door, the rifle across his knees. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his mind was still sharp. He had listened all night for returning footsteps, but none came. Still, his gut told him it was only a pause, not the end. Behind him, Neela slept soundly, curled against her mother. The girl's face was peaceful at last, but her small hand still clutched her mother's dress tightly, as if afraid she would vanish if she let go. Lyra had stayed awake most of the night too, watching Daniel in silence. Her eyes carried exhaustion, but also something more, a storm of thoughts she had not yet spoken. When the first rays of light slipped into the cabin, Daniel stood and stretched his stiff limbs. He went outside, the rifle still in his hands. His boots crunched against the frozen ground as he scanned the trees. No movement, no voices, only the call of a crow in the distance. He returned inside. Relieved for the moment, Lyra looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. He gave a small nod, letting her know it was safe for now. Later, after a meal of bread and boiled roots, Neela drifted back into sleep. The child's small body was still weak from hunger and fear. Daniel tucked the blanket around her and stepped back. It was then that Lyra finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost breaking. "You shouldn't risk yourself for us." Daniel turned to her. "I already have," he said simply. Her eyes glistened as she lowered her head. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then she whispered, "I can't keep running. I can't watch Neela suffer anymore. I can't fight alone." Daniel frowned. "You don't have to fight alone anymore." Her eyes lifted to meet his. There. It was pain in them, but also hope. Her voice trembled as she said the words that changed everything. Then, "Be with us, Daniel. Be my husband. Be Neela's father." The words struck him harder than the men at the door. For a moment, he simply stood frozen. His heart pounded, his mouth opened, but no words came. Lyra's hands shook as she pressed them. "Together, I know it is sudden. I know you never asked for this," she said quickly, "but I have no one left. And Neela needs more than a stranger's kindness. She needs someone who will stay. Someone who will protect her. Someone she can call father." Her voice broke on the last word. Daniel's chest tightened. He looked at the sleeping child, her small face, soft and innocent. He thought of her fear when the men banged on the door. The way she clung to her mother, the way she looked at him with trust. "Lyra," Daniel whispered. His voice hoarse. "You don't even know me." She shook her head. "I know enough." Her eyes locked onto his. "I saw how you looked at my daughter. When you thought no one noticed, you already care. You already protect us. That is more than I ever had from my own family." Daniel turned away, pacing near the window. His thoughts battled inside him for years. He had built walls around his heart. He had sworn to live alone, to keep pain away. Now, with a few words, those walls were crumbling. "I don't know if I can give you what you ask," he admitted, his voice cracked with truth. "I've lived too long in silence. I've forgotten what it means to be part of a family." Lyra stood slowly, her steps unsteady. She came closer, her hands clutching the edge of her dress, her eyes filled with tears. "Then let me remind you," she whispered. "Not just for me, but for Neela. She needs a father, and I need someone who will not leave me in the dark." Daniel's throat tightened. He felt the weight of her words, the desperation, the hope, the trust. He looked at her again, really looked at her. She was tired, fragile, marked by suffering. Yet she carried herself with strength. Her eyes shone with a fierce love for her child, and with a pleading honesty that struck deep into his soul. He remembered his own loneliness, the empty nights, the silent days. He remembered the family he had lost long ago, the promise he once made to never open his heart again. And now, here stood a woman asking him to break that promise. Not for her alone, but for the little girl sleeping near the fire. His chest ached. As he whispered, "Why me, Lyra? Why not someone else?" She stepped closer, her hand brushing the edge of his sleeve. "Because you were the only one who stopped? It's the only one who gave when others turned away." "That is enough, Daniel. That is everything." Silence wrapped around them. Daniel felt his heart fighting itself, part of him terrified, part of him wanting to say yes. Neela stirred, her small eyes opening. She looked up at her mother, then at Daniel. Her lips curved in a tired but hopeful smile. "Are you my father now?" She whispered softly. The words shattered him. Daniel knelt down, his hands trembling. He could not answer. Not yet. He only touched her small hand gently. "Rest now," he said softly. "We will talk later." But in his chest, the answer was already forming. That night, long after Neela drifted back into sleep, Lyra sat quietly by the fire, her eyes on him. She did not press again. She only waited. Her presence was calm, steady, patient. Daniel sat near the door. The rifle still closed. His thoughts stormed inside him. But one truth stood firm. He could not send them away. He could not let them face the darkness alone. And though he had not spoken the words yet, deep inside he knew his life had already changed. For when Lyra's plea echoed in his mind, when Neela's innocent question lingered in his heart, Daniel realized something powerful. He was no longer just a man in a cabin. He was becoming something. More protector, father, husband, and soon he would have to decide whether to accept it fully or lose the only light he had found in years. The cabin was quiet, but Daniel's heart was not. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames as they flickered and danced. Each spark seemed to whisper the same question. What will you choose? Behind him, Neela slept soundly, her small body curled under the thick blanket, her face finally free of fear. Lyra sat beside her, awake but silent. Her hands rested in her lap. But her eyes stayed fixed on Daniel, watching him, waiting for his answer. He felt the weight of that gaze. It was not just the request of a woman, it was the desperate plea of a mother. The unspoken cry of a child who wanted a father. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His thoughts swirled like a storm. For years, he had lived alone, surviving the silence of the forest. He told himself it was safer that way. No attachments, no heartbreak. But now, two strangers had walked into his life and torn down the walls he had built. He remembered the knock at his door, the little girl trembling in the cold, the way her eyes lit up when he gave her bread. He remembered the danger of the men outside, their voices filled with cruelty. He remembered Lyra's words, "Be my husband, be Neela's father." His chest tightened. Daniel stood and walked to the window. The night outside was thick, the trees swaying under the wind. He pressed his hand against the wooden frame. Staring out into the dark, he knew the men would return. Men like that never stopped. They would come back, stronger, angrier. If he chose to turn Lyra and Neela away, he might save himself from the fight. He could lock the door behind them, pretend he had never seen them, live out his days in silence again. But the thought made his stomach twist with guilt. He knew Neela would not survive long, and Lyra's strength was already fading. If he chose them, if he said yes, it would not just be kindness, it would be a promise. It would mean fighting for them, bleeding for them, living for them. It would mean he would never be alone again, but it would also mean carrying their pain as his own. Lyra's voice broke the silence, soft but steady. "You don't have to answer now," she said. "I know it is a lot to ask." Daniel turned to her slowly. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, he saw not just desperation, but courage. She was tired, broken in some ways, but she was still fighting. She had walked through cruelty and loss, yet she still had enough hope to ask him to stand beside her. "Lyra," Daniel said quietly, "I don't know if I'm the man you think I am." Her lips trembled, but she shook her head. "You are?" She whispered, "Because you stayed when others turned away. Because you fought when others would have run, because you looked at us and saw people worth saving." Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, but he could not. Her words were true. Neela stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly, "Papa." The words slipped from her lips like a dream. But it pierced Daniel's chest like a blade. He knelt down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His hands trembled. She clutched his finger even in her sleep, as if she already knew his answer. The fire cracked, the room filled with its glow. Daniel stood and faced Lyra. His voice was rough but clear. "If I say yes, there's no going back," he said. "The men outside, the danger, all of it, I'll have to stand in the middle of it with you." Lyra rose slowly, her eyes shining. "And I will stand with you," she said, "not behind." But beside you, for a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Daniel took a deep breath, his chest rising heavy. "Then my choice is made," he whispered. "I will not turn away, not from her, not from you." Tears filled Lyra's eyes. She pressed her hand to her lips, then lowered it, her voice trembling with relief. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." Daniel shook his head. "I think I do," he said. "It means I'm not just surviving anymore. It means I have something to protect." He felt a strange strength in his chest, not the strength of a lonely man, but the strength of someone with a purpose, someone with a reason to fight. The rest of the night passed in silence. But it was not the same silence as before. It was no longer empty. It was filled with something heavier but brighter hope. At dawn, Daniel stepped outside again. The air was cold, his breath white in the air. He looked at the footprints from the night before, already half covered by snow, but he knew more would come. He walked back into the cabin where Lyra was tending to Neela. The girl was awake now, smiling weakly as her mother brushed her tangled hair. When she saw Daniel, she ran to him and hugged his leg. "You didn't leave," she whispered. Daniel knelt down, hugging her back gently. "I will never leave," he said. The words surprised even him, but they felt true, stronger than any promise he had ever made. Lyra stood in the doorway, watching them with quiet eyes. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. It was the first real smile Daniel had seen on her face, but even as warmth filled the cabin, Daniel's mind stayed sharp. He knew the danger was not gone. The men would return, maybe with more, and when they did, he would have to face them, not just as a man protecting himself, but as a father protecting his family. He looked at Lyra, then at Neela, and felt the choice settle in his bones like stone. He was no longer just Daniel the survivor. He was Daniel the protector, and in that moment, Rusa, he knew that survival was no longer about living through each day. It was about living for them. The morning sun broke through the clouds, spilling weak light across the forest. Daniel stood outside the cabin, the rifle across his back. His breath rose in pale mist, and his eyes scanned the tree line. Every rustle, every shadow made his chest tighten. He knew the men would come back. He just didn't know when. But for the first time in years, Daniel felt something deeper than fear. He felt purpose. He had made his choice, and it gave him strength. Inside, the sound of laughter reached him, soft and surprising. He turned and stepped back into the cabin. Lyra was kneeling by the fire, showing Neela how to warm her hands near the flames without burning herself. Neela giggled, her small face brighter than Daniel had ever seen. The sight filled his chest with warmth. His cabin, once cold and empty, was alive. The silence that had haunted him for so long was broken by voices, by laughter, by the sound of life. When Neela saw him, she ran forward and wrapped her arms around his leg. "Papa," she whispered. Her voice was shy, but full of hope. Daniel froze for a moment, then bent down, pulling her into his arms. He felt her heart beat against his chest, steady and trusting. Lyra watched, her lips trembling. She whispered softly, almost as if afraid the words would vanish, "She already sees you as her father." Daniel met her eyes. His voice was quiet but steady. "Then I will be her father," he said, "and I will be your husband. If you'll have me." Lyra gasped softly. Tears welled in her eyes. She covered her mouth with her hand, then lowered it, whispering, "Yes." "Daniel?" "Yes." For a moment, the cabin seemed brighter. The fire burned warmer. The air felt alive. Neela clapped her small hands, her laughter filling the room. "We're a family now," she said, but Daniel's joy was edged with steel. He knew words alone would not keep them safe. He knew the men would not stop, and so, while his heart swelled with love, his mind sharpened with determination. The day passed in uneasy peace. Daniel gathered wood, checked his rifle, and set simple traps near the cabin. Lyra helped where she could, though her strength was still weak. Neela followed them, humming softly, holding onto Daniel's coat whenever she could as evening fell. The forest grew quiet again, too quiet. Daniel felt it before he heard voices moving through the trees. Footsteps crunching over snow. He placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "Take Neela inside. Keep her close," he said. Lyra obeyed quickly. Daniel stood outside, his rifle raised. His heart pounded, but he did not tremble. The men appeared, 4 of them this time, their faces hard, their eyes sharp. One stepped forward, sneering, "We warned you, old man. Step aside and no harm will come to you." Daniel shook his head. His voice was calm, like stone. "You're not touching them, not while I live." The men laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. They saw the fire in his eyes, the steadiness in his hands. "You can't stop us," another growled. Daniel's grip tightened on the rifle. "Try," he said simply. The standoff stretched. The wind howled between the trees. Finally, one of the men cursed. Spitting on the ground, "Not worth it. Let's go," he muttered. But his eyes promised they would return. The men faded back into the trees, their voices swallowed by the night. Daniel lowered his rifle slowly. His chest heaved, his hands shook now, but not from fear, from the storm of emotion he carried. He stepped back into the cabin. Lyra rushed to him, her hands clutching his arms. "Daniel," she whispered, "you stood for us." He nodded. "I will always stand for you, Neela." Climbed into his lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "You scared them away," she said proudly. Her innocent words filled the room with warmth. That night, they sat together by the fire. Daniel on one side, Lyra on the other. Neela curled between them. For the first time in years, Daniel felt whole. The cabin no longer felt like a prison of solitude. It was a home. As the firelight flickered across their faces, Daniel reached for Lyra's hand. She took it, her fingers trembling but strong. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. They both knew the truth. They were no longer alone. Daniel whispered into the quiet, his voice low but steady. "We'll survive this. Not just survive, we'll live together." Neela stirred sleepily, whispering a family before drifting into dreams. Daniel and Lyra shared a quiet smile. The night outside was still dangerous. The men still out there, the forest still cold and cruel, but inside the cabin, something stronger than fear had been born, a new family, built not by blood alone, but by choice, by courage, by love. And Daniel knew in his heart that no matter what storm came next, they would face it together.